And okay, so
There we
now
go.
it's recording. Great. So my name is Sydney Montgomery. Like I said, I graduated from Princeton University with a degree in English and a certificate in French language and culture. I then went straight to Harvard Law School, where I focused mainly on child and domestic violence issues and custody issues, as well as some policy issues. I have been doing admissions consulting since 2012, law school consulting since 2015. I got my certificate in independent educational consulting through the University of California, Irvine's Division of Continuing Education, and I'm a proud member of the Independent Educational Consulting Association, and I'm on the graduate school committee. The Independent Educational Consultants Association is a nationwide organization of independent consultants who believe in upholding ethical practices in admissions consulting. That means I don't write essays for people. I don't engage in any kind of academic dishonesty. But my goal is really to push you to achieve your full potential, to help you realize your law school dreams, and to help you have more confidence and find your voice. My motto is, be inspired, be confident, and be pushed to your full potential. I don't make promises about schools, but I make promises about students. Over 85% of my law school applicants have been accepted to a top 20 law school. I'm very proud of all of them, and I think it was mostly them with a little bit of a push from me. My virtual consulting model does allow me to help clients nationwide and actually abroad. I have a couple of international students, which is very exciting. And, I'm able to kind of help students no matter what time zones they are. So like I said, I believe in ethical consulting with strong values. You can find out more about me on my website. There's a Meet Sydney page. And if you're really interested, there's my story page, which kind of explains to you a little bit about how I got into educational consulting. So if you have any questions throughout this, like I said, there's a Q&A, or afterwards, there's my website, my phone number, my email, and you can always follow me on Instagram at @smontgomery consulting, where there's a lot of really great updates. Without further ado, though, I'm going to let Dave kind of take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Sydney. First off, for all those reasons you mentioned, I was super excited to join the call today and work alongside and partner with Sydney to bring a little value to her clients and clientele from the planning perspective. So a little background on myself. I'm 36, born and raised in New Jersey, and was fortunate enough, as Sydney mentioned, to attend Princeton University, where I was a member of the varsity football team and studied ecology and evolutionary biology. So I think a long time ago, I thought medicine was going to be a career path for me in med school. So I had done all those requirements. And when I graduated, I thought after, playing ball those years and dealing with the grind of undergrad, I decided to take some time off and actually got into teaching and coaching at a private school in New Jersey. Blink your eyes and 12 years go by and I was still there and had done a master's degree in educational leadership at Seton Hall University after the fact. And I enjoyed it, right? I was loving life, was coaching and teaching, and really felt passionate about what I was doing and how I was educating students and players alike. But I always felt unfulfilled. And that led me to the career that I find myself in today in financial services. So I always had a personal planning mind and entrepreneurial mindset. And when I made the leap to leave my prior career and transition to this field, it was so that I could help others do the same thing that I had been tackling on my own for myself and my own family. So when I got into this career, I was excited and passionate to teach others about their finances rather than science, which is what I was teaching in my previous life. So when I connected with Sydney and she ran by the idea of doing this webinar, I jumped at the opportunity to kind of pursue my passion and introduce my skill set to others and see if I could help add some value to their plan and to their lives. So like I said, I'm a former teacher and coach. So a lot of the analogies that I make come from the athletic world, and my apologies in advance for that. But my team and I run, there you go, team, there's the first one. My team and I run a holistic financial planning practice in Midtown. We work with clients all over the country, though, nationwide. Clients in Colorado, California, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, and it really spreads the globe with the virtual abilities and tools that we now have in our toolbox. And frankly, I've been here in my home office since March 9th. I haven't been in the city. And as Sydney shared, that makes me really flexible with my time and allows me to spend my down hours with my family. So my wife and my 2 young boys who are 5 and 3 and currently out of the house. So if there's any questions, feel free to cut me off and drop them to Sydney or in the Q&A box. I'd be happy to make this as conversational as possible. But a lot of the things we're going to cover are just general financial planning tips for those kind of at this stage in their lives where they may be thinking about applications to law school and the next step in their career. A lot of you are post-undergrad, I'm informed by Sydney. So thinking about how to strategically plan for the future is important. And I try to instill that in all my clients from an early age. It is never too early to start a plan. I can't echo that enough. It is never too early to start a plan. Whether you think you're not the ideal client or you don't have the assets to invest or to plan accordingly, I'll say it again, it's never too early to have a game plan, right? Because what we help people do is evolve with their career and with their personal lives and their professional lives to attain their goals as quickly and as efficiently as possible, whether that's a new home, a new car, paying off those student loans, getting the next opportunity at a new job, and evaluating employee benefits and all these things. It's really a comprehensive approach. So no one does it overnight. No one puts a complete plan in place from the get-go. They kind of chip away at it, slow and steady over time until they can slowly build a comprehensive approach to their finances. So some of the things that we start with, obviously, are taking a look at, really what are your goals and having that plan and, supporting them with suggestions or recommendations as to how we can put ourselves on the right track to accomplish those goals within our time frame. So, as we sit down, you want to make sure you're talking to an expert. I'm not saying that person has to be me or somebody else, but build a trusted team of resources around you, right? Talk to somebody who's been handling finances professionally 24/7, right? If I had a lawyerly question, I would contact Sydney, right? So I'm not going to sit here and try to say that I have all the answers, but you should start building that team of resources as you start thinking about your career and your education and say, hey, I need somebody I need to go to when I have a question about finances, when I have a question about law. You go to the doctor when you have a question about your health. You should go to somebody when you have a question about your finances. And that's how we look at the planning perspective. Aside from that, and consulting with someone, I think you really need to know your goals, right? Know personally what you want to achieve. Why am I running this rat race, right? Why am I pursuing law school as an option? What does that get me? Does that get me on track to be financially independent? And what does that mean to me, right? So when I think about the planning process, I dig in and ask clients, well, why, right? Why do you want to go to law school? What does that achieve for you? Is it status? Is it you want to make a difference? Is it more income? Is it to retire young or to have financial independence? Is it to purchase a home, to grow your family, to pay off college debt, because you want to live a lifestyle that's different than you currently have? Maybe you travel, or maybe you want to own a second home. I always joke and say, do you want that vacation home down the Jersey Shore? But I'm biased. I'm from New Jersey. But start to think about the why. And it can't just be about the money, right? A lot of financial advisors, I think, will say, well, how much do you have in assets? And, here's what I can do to grow those assets. But I feel a lot of individuals don't ask the deeper questions as to, well, why are we growing the assets? What is your goal? And I think when you start asking clients those questions, that really causes them to stop and think about, well, geez, wait, I've never thought about retirement. When do I want to stop working? Maybe that's when college is paid for my kids, or maybe that's when my mortgage is paid off and I have enough assets to sustain my lifestyle. Or maybe it's some arbitrary number when I get to $10 million. It's whatever it may be, but it's individual and it's personal. And sometimes if the family's involved, it's a family goal. So I encourage all of you to think about, why you're doing this and why you should have a game plan as you start to embark on your application process to law school. While you're in school, and a lot of clients I ask, have you ever built a budget? You should think about how you're approaching your month-to-month expenses and your cash flow. You're all working, I assume, right now, and if you're not, that's okay as well. But understanding what assets you have to your name and what liabilities you have against your name is important, because you may incur some debt while you're in law school, and you want to make sure that when you graduate, you try to keep that number as low as possible. That means while you're in school, try to live like a student, right? For lack of a better term, try to be cheap, right? You want to save where you can and cut back on frivolous or unnecessary expenses so that when you get out, you can graduate in the best position possible. And what does that mean? That means understanding, what's coming in month to month and what's going out in rent or food costs or, a night out with friends on the town. So understanding and thinking about those things is going to be important so that you can focus on being as efficient as possible with the income that you do have while you're in law school, or certainly as you're pursuing that degree, you're thinking about that decision. Certainly the goal is always to minimize debts, but understand that law school debt, med school debt, those mortgage debt, those are generally considered good types of debt to have against your name. And I know Sydney mentioned that some questions came in before the webinar. Sid, what was that one question about the?
There was two questions. The loan question.
Yeah, about the debt. We talked about it briefly.
So I think one of the questions that people sometimes have is, how much? There's so many questions, but like how much debt to take on. I think we were talking about, how to deal with the loans, like, the type of loans, how does the loans work with financial aid. And I think people sometimes are trying to figure out if they should go to a high priced school with less, should they take the full ride at a lower ranked school, or should they take, the expensive school that's higher ranked with the name, and how do they balance those things?
You can share your story maybe after this and I can share mine. I didn't go to law school, but I did pay for my master's at Seton Hall out of pocket, and I do know what it's like to incur some debt from my undergrad. I come from a blue collar background, and I'm blessed to say that my parents were wise enough to not worry about the cost of Princeton when I had the opportunity to go, right? Even though I played football, it's not a scholarship institution like a Penn State or Clemson or something. So I had to pay my way and be an athlete at the same time. So when I got out, I had some debt that I paid back, but they were wise enough to not make my decision about college based on finances. It was, you go where you want to go. If you have the opportunity to go, you're going to go, and we'll find a way to pay for it in the long run, because we saw it as that valuable an opportunity. And I think that's a personal option. Yes, could you go to school on a full ride and not graduate with debt? Totally. Could you go to a school like Harvard, and I'll use Sydney's example, and pay for it or have substantial loans when you graduate? 100% you could. But the value of a degree from a Harvard Law, Yale Law, et cetera, is, I think, super powerful in the real world. It's going to instantly put your name at the top of many, many piles for jobs and for the rest of your career. And we've both lived that experience, even though, my background wasn't in law school, and Sydney can speak to her own personal experience in that regard as well.
Yeah, so I would say on both ends, I come from a low income background. I did not fully realize how low income I was until I got to Princeton. I always joke that the higher up I got in school, from Princeton to Harvard Law, the lower my socioeconomic status ended up being. I was like, oh, I'm moderately low income at Princeton. And then I got to Harvard Law. Oh no, I'm very low income. Okay, cool. But I did take out a few, I took out a small amount of loans to go to Princeton. Princeton is mostly loan free, but my family could not afford the family contribution. And my parents thought it was worth it. And then I was on max financial aid at Harvard, but that still requires you to take out a substantial amount of loans at the law school level. And I did turn down a full ride. I turned down a full ride to UVA. And at first, before I got into Harvard, I think my parents were like having a little conniption. They were like, what do you mean you're not going to take the full ride? I have no regrets. I have no regrets about it. I think it's the best decision. I would 100% make that decision again. Yes, I am in debt, but I would not be able to have made the moves that I made in my career. I would not probably be able to be doing this as well and doing what I love. And, the doors really did open for me. And I think that I also talk to my students about the difference between a full ride and full tuition. I think those get a little interchanged and they're not the same, because full tuition still means that you have extra, which can be up to $20,000, $30,000 a year extra, and then you're still graduating with $100,000 in debt, but without the name. And so, everyone makes a different, I don't say, oh, it's bad if you take UVA, if you take that full ride. I mean, that's a personal decision. But I don't want people to be afraid to, make that kind of decision.
And I think Virginia Law is a great school. And
also a great school.
It's also a choice, right? It's a choice. And, like we discussed, I mean, I was in college, I was on a Pell Grant. That's like a low income, grant that I got 1 year. So I totally understand what it was like graduating with that debt, but knowing that the power that degree carries in the real world. And from my seat now, working with clients who have graduated law school, med school, et cetera, the ability that they have to pay down that debt is substantial.
Yeah.
I mean, the earnings capacity, not just in the short term, but career trajectory is significant with a Harvard Law degree, with some, a Wharton business degree, et cetera, because it is so coveted in the industry. Now, both public and private sector lawyers, specifically, I've seen that with. So, and I've also seen banks extend mortgages, et cetera, refinancing opportunities to clients who have just graduated or were starting a family, who necessarily didn't have the liquidity or assets to support a sizable loan, but they had a degree and they had a job. And the bank was able to say, hey, we know you're going to be able to pay this down. So we're comfortable extending you X amount of dollars to purchase that first home or to refinance your student loans and attain a better rate that you can pay off sooner. So
right. And I'll just add one more thing, Dave. You may be listening to the webinar and think, okay, that's great, but I'm not choosing between, UVA and Harvard. I'm choosing between one school that's ranked 80 and one school that's ranked 50. And what should I do? And I think in that situation, I might even make a slightly different recommendation, and Dave, feel free to correct me. But if you are choosing between two schools that I think are, they may be fantastic schools. I'm not, elitist in terms of rankings. I think the rankings, can be valuable, but I also think that they use a lot of metrics that don't always matter. But so, and then I would say, okay, maybe those are both regional schools. You need to look at maybe what the employment rate is, and maybe you do take the scholarship because maybe at that point, the name might be similar enough. The employment outcomes might be similar enough where you do want to take, the scholarships if you have them.
Yeah, I think it's also understanding what you want to do in terms of the law field, right? So if you're going to be a corporate lawyer, making X amount of dollars more than maybe a public sector assistant prosecutor or something, there's drastic differences there in benefits and salary income trajectory for a while, based on the different routes you choose post law school. So those are things to consider too when you're thinking about the cost of attending school during your degree process. So one of the other things I would echo would be to know your budget, right? Know what your budget is now before school, know how it could change with reduced income or different sources of income, and live within your means, right? I think is really important to sacrifice for that success and still be able to either save or at least not run at a deficit. One of the things that I always recommend clients try to avoid is racking up, debt outside of those law school loans. So you don't want to be, putting a night of drinks with friends on a bar tab on a credit card, and then ultimately being saddled with 25, 30% interest rates on some of that credit card debt. That is much harder to climb out of than, say, law school debt or a mortgage, et cetera. So live like a student again, right? Give it a test run or practice run before you're back in school. Think about living on a budget, or think about means of generating income while you're in school. I know Sydney worked while she was in her law school, several jobs.
All years.
But be a hustler. You have to work for success. And I think being a full-time student is great, but also making sure that you're setting yourself up for financial success after you graduate is also important. And like I said, having a game plan early is never a bad idea, and talking to someone about how you can maximize the current assets that you do have is an opportunity as well. I do have some budget forms that I'd be happy to share or connect with people one-on-one after this, just to help you work through and think through some of the problems. But build a budget, talk about what your plan is, and know what your budget is before you apply, and know how the application process and school process can impact that earnings that lifestyle assets you have to live your life off of in the meantime while you're in school. And as Sydney mentioned, I think when we were prepping for this, there's sometimes an option to take out more personal debt, I guess, when you're in school, living expenses and such. And I understand that sometimes it can be hard to go back to the well and get more assets if you need them. So I would say, do your homework, do your math. You're all smart, presumably. So, maybe not mathematicians if you're going to law school. Maybe it's more books for you. I don't know. I wasn't a big lawyer, but I would say do your homework and make sure that you are taking what you need and no more. And certainly, if you're going to take extra expenses to live off of, in living expenses or personal expenses as a form of an additional loan, to make sure that you're not, that you're disciplined enough not to touch that pool of assets and just use that as emergency funds if you need to go there. But they shouldn't become lifestyle expenses that cover, like I said, a night out on the town, because you certainly don't want to add to the pile of debt that's unnecessary when you graduate.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I just wanted to add, like, on the jobs front, because we did get the question about how is it feasible to have a job in law school. I had this motto even through college, because I worked several jobs in college. You want a high pay rate, but you want kind of a low hours, like low hours, high pay. So what does that mean? I did a lot of nannying and tutoring. At 20, especially, in Cambridge or Harvard, at $20, $30 an hour. And I would do it for maybe 4 or 5 hours a week. And so I would get, $100, $200 a week. And that wasn't a lot of time on my end. And I could even do my homework for some of it, or I was like a paid research assistant for a professor. Like, you don't want to take, you can if you need to, but it's kind of like, those library jobs or, those dining jobs, a lot of those are like high hours, low pay. You can potentially make a lot more money maybe, or the same amount of money, but it comes harder to juggle with your schoolwork.
Yeah, one of the other topics I wanted to touch on was just, what we recommend in savings. And, if you can still save while you're in school, great, right? It's never too early to start saving. And making sure that you're continuing to do that even while it may be really, really hard to. There's that age-old adage, pay yourself first, right? Before you go, spend it on material items or spend it on others or experiences, right? Save a little for the future. If you can still do that, great. If not, I understand. You should also build up your emergency fund. So, in the planning process that we take our clients through, we recommend anywhere from 3 to 12 months of expenses. So if you said, hey, Dave, Sydney, my monthly run rate of expenses, all in, total cash out the door on a monthly basis is $2,000. Well, if it's $2,000 a month, you should have anywhere from 3 to 12 months of those expenses set aside in case of emergency. And excuse me, some of you may say that that's a lot right now, and that's understandable, but try to get there if you can as quickly as possible, because that will give you enough of a cushion should something happen. you know, if I was talking to a young couple and they were saying, you know, how much should we set aside in our like emergency fund? Well, I would ask more questions. Okay, do you have kids? Yes or no? Do you own a home? Okay, you have a mortgage that your name's on. You have to be able to pay that no matter what. So let's think about it. What's your job security like, right? If you're, you know, a police officer and a teacher, your jobs are pretty secure, right? So you want to make sure that, you know, that family may have on the 3 to 6 month side of expenses because, you know, tenure for teachers, et cetera. However, if you're in a corporate job and there's layoffs or, you know, economic unrest like there is currently in the environment, then that's something that you might want to have a little bit more socked away for a rainy day fund set aside. So know your number, you know, be strategic about where you put that money and just put it in a savings account and say, hey, this is my rainy day fund and I'm not going to touch this. And then that obviously changes as your expenses change over time and your income changes. So that'd be one big thing I would say is know your budget and have some emergency savings set aside that you don't touch no matter what, right? Make sure that that's hands off for tuition payments, that's hands off for beer money. That's, you know, it's truly, you know, there for a rainy day.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice. It's something that I will say that I'm still working on.
Listen, we all are, right? I mean, and everyone, you know, as we sit here, and Sydney and I have discussed this before, everyone has a different threshold for where they feel comfortable in liquidity, right? How much cash is on hand, be it under the mattress or in the bank account or in the savings account. You know, everyone has a different threshold, but just know your threshold and know what the general rule of thumb is for those types of you know, account levels. And then if we can go to the savings slide, Sid, the one with the 60, 20, 20 would be great. Sorry.
Is this one?
I think it's after that. Keep going. One more, maybe. One more. Maybe another one.
I can find it. I know that there was one with 20, but I don't know if it had
There was one that said 60. So basically, it's a general rule of thumb that, you know, based on your income.
Oh, I know where it is.
There you go.
There it is.
Yeah, beautiful. You know, based on your income, you want to make sure that your living expenses don't exceed, you know, 60% of that take home, and that you can essentially, you know, save and invest potentially 20%. Now, I know that becomes harder when you're a student, but you don't want to give up on those years of being wise, especially even though you're incurring the debt in law school, you're not going to be asked to start paying it back until you graduate, right? So there will be a bit of forbearance and on hold those payments for a little bit. And then, you know, carve out 20% for discretionary. Look, we all deserve to live a little bit and, you know, spend on entertainment, personal care, clothing, nights out, movies, whatever. But I always try to focus on clients that the discretionary piece should not come at the expense of savings. And it certainly shouldn't come at the expense of essential needs, be it food, insurance, you know, car payment, you know, whatever it may be.
I think this is so good because one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is because like I mentioned, I'm lower income and I didn't know a lot about money before I went to college or even law school. And so, you know, when I was taking on a lot of these loans, I just think like how helpful it would have been if I knew something like the 20-60-20 rule. You know, if I knew about having 6 months of emergency spending, I think, you know, just speaking, you know, quite candidly about myself, I was like, okay, well, they're all loans and none of it really is real money. So, you know,
the traps of credit cards, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You want to try to avoid that quote unquote bad debt too. And even though it's quote unquote not real money, it is a liability and they all come with different rates. And sometimes making minimums on a payment that is 20% interest rate in a credit card compared to, even though the weight of student debt feels real because it's large, that's really low interest rate debt generally, right? You know, it could be anywhere from the 5-6% range and even lower in today's credit environment. So understanding the difference between that and paying the minimums versus paying it off month to month, right? If you have a credit card, you pay it off month to month and just live within your means rather than, you know, buying something and paying it off over 6 months or 8 months.
Right. And I think that's the trap when you're in law school, you're so busy, right? You're studying and you're like, well, I don't have time to cook. I don't have time to do
Yep.
this. I don't have time to walk or take the bus. You're just like, let me just do the fastest, most time efficient manner, which sometimes is not the most cost effective
Mhm.
manner. And so learning how to balance that is so important.
Correct. Yep. Like I said, know your budget, right? Try to live as best within your means as possible and make the sacrifice now because it will pay off exponentially after school, right? It will just help you get on your feet so much more quickly after you graduate and hit the other side of your career when you really start building that earnings capacity and runway for success. So you want to give yourself a head start as best you can.
Do we need to move off the slide, or we good with the slide?
Oh yeah, we're good with that one. I
So,
think I'm kind of getting to the end of my, I think bullet point here list.
yeah, I have a couple questions that I wanted
Sure.
to throw out to you. So, some people may be feeling, okay, what would you say is the number one thing they could do to make sure? I know you've said make a plan, but like, let's break that down. Like, let's say they're going to start school in September, or even they're going to start school next year. So maybe two different plans. Like, what is the thing that they can do now to make sure that they're in a good place at the end of their law school career?
I mean, it's a great question. I think we've harped on a lot of the points already. So not to be, a broken record here, but, I think it's have a plan, but be strategic, right? Be sacrifice for what you want. And I think trying to minimize debt that you incur is important while you're in law school. But I understand 100% that a lot of it is necessary because you're a student and the workload is significant. But I would definitely say have a plan, stick to it, try to cut out unnecessary expenses and understand what your goals are. I'll go back to that, right? Find out why, what is it that you are working toward? And I think the sooner you can figure that out, the easier it is to build a plan around.
Now, what if they have not actually been, maybe up to this point working with a plan, and maybe they already have a bunch of credit card debt, maybe they already have a lot of undergrad debt,
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to figure out, do I pay that stuff off first and then try to go to law school? How do you balance if they're not in a good financial position right now?
Great question. I think this is where everyone's plan becomes individualized and personalized, right? So no two clients are the same, right? I talk to people all day long, all over the country that are totally unique situations. No one's situation is the same. So understanding, giving advice on a broad question like that. For some people, it may be, hey, you just graduated, you have undergrad debt, and you're going right to law school. That's great. And go right to law school. And, when you get out, obviously you're not going to have to pay back your undergraduate loans while you're in law school. When you get out, you're just going to have potentially more debt from undergrad and law school to pay back when you get on the other side. And you could look to refinancing those in the future and things like that and be creative. But everyone's plan and the answer to that question is really unique. And that's why I would say consult with an expert, talk to somebody. And I said, it doesn't have to be me. I'd be happy to talk to anybody, but talk to somebody and say, hey, these are my goals. This is what I want to do. What's going to get me to the other side as efficiently as possible financially in my life so that I don't have to make any learning mistakes along the way.
And can you walk me through a little bit? What would it look like if someone did say, hey, yeah, I do want to talk to Dave about my finances? Like, what does that look like?
Great. So typically a client, we would schedule time to talk, 30, 45-minute call initially. And we would just kind of talk about things. What are your goals? What do you want to do? Give me a little background on yourself and your family so we can get to know each other like we're doing here. And then, we would have to get a little data and dig a little deeper in the assets and liabilities front. Okay, so, what are your savings? Where are they? Do you have a retirement account, investment account, cash, checking, savings, etc.? What's the liabilities against your name? Do you have a car payment? Do you have a mortgage? Do you have, what amount of law school debt do you have? What interest rate? And then we would basically build a customized plan based on the output of that conversation and say, okay, Sydney wants to be here in 5 years. How are we going to get her there? I'm using you as an example, just anybody, but how are we going to get her law school loans paid off? How are we going to get her that down payment for her first home, that new car that she's driving around in, right? How are we going to pay that down? All these things, check, check, check. And this is going to be the most efficient way possible. The other thing is, when people get on the other side of law school, helping them consider employee benefits when they take their first job, what benefits package should they opt for? What are the type of things that they should elect to be smart? Because one of the ways that we view our planning process is through risk management first, and making sure that, we kind of put guardrails on the plan to ensure that no matter what, our goals are going to be achieved. And some of those things look like different insurance, like disability insurance that may be supplemental to a group policy, or supplemental life insurance or things like that for our families, depending on everyone's individual situation, right? If you're young and single, life insurance may not make the most sense for you at this point, right? But like I said, it's all individualized. So if there's people out there that want to set up time to have a conversation about it, I know Sydney's going to send out my contact information with my email and phone number. I'd be happy to set time aside.
And then I think the last question I have for you is there anything that's different about the plan making or the budgeting or the spending rule, with COVID, with the, economic uncertainty?
Great question. People's lives have changed, right? For some clients, I've seen some uncertainty with their job situation, depending on the field of work. Others have seen no impact at all. They either always worked remotely, or some people have even seen an uptick in their business because of this process. I shouldn't say process, because of the COVID situation. So it really is unique. I would say, just a general rule of thumb would be to increase that emergency funds and keep that savings a little higher during times of uncertainty. But it can also present great opportunities. Times like these can present great long-term opportunities to build a plan and, start retirement savings and other investments. So, being that most people on this call, I presume, are at the early stages of the career and young, I would say times like these often present opportunities because you have a lot of years of working and savings and investing ahead of you. So that's why I stress the point that it's never too early to have a game plan.
I think that's super wise. I think this has been fantastic. I don't think we have any other questions, but absolutely, I am going to, put out. I'm going to go back to the title slide. I figured out how the slides work. Your name. I will absolutely, if anyone has any questions, they can contact me. They can contact Dave. My question slide is here. You can visit my website, subscribe to my newsletter, follow me on Instagram. I have been incredibly happy that we have gotten to spend this time talking with Dave. In 2 weeks, we will be doing another webinar specifically targeting those of you who are coming out of law school. So even though I know most of you on this call are going into law school, it might not, be a bad thing to listen in to see, okay, what does the other side of the equation look like in 3 years? We're going to be talking a lot about, transitioning out of law school into a career and some financial implications there. But, we are available. We are here for you. And we are just so happy that you have taken the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Sydney, and everyone for joining the call. I'd be happy to help, like I said, be a resource for you in the future, certainly as you're evaluating these decisions. And they're big life decisions. And that's where, I think having a trusted advisor is someone like Sydney or myself to just kick an idea off of is a great idea.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And like I said, the webinar recording will be there and I'll send it out.
Thanks, Sydney.
Take care.
Bye.